So the Rock is coming to Duel Links, and I've seen a ton of debate online so far as to whether or not this card's going to be good, bad, or whether or not it's even worth the investment, considering although it's coming to the game, it's only coming in a selection box, meaning if you want 3 copies of this card, chances are you're probably going to have to whip out that credit card. The last 2 packs are Nibiru and the spell card, by the way. Konami, I don't normally like to call rigged on your packs, but that's a little bit sus, don't you reckon? So I thought I'd make a video giving my personal thoughts and takes as to whether or not you should actually be spending money on trying to obtain as many copies of this card as possible, and just how important this card might be for Duel Links in the future. So without further ado, let's go check it out. So just a little bit of context for the people that click this video, and they're purely Duel Links players and they have absolutely no clue what Nibiru is or have any clue this card's even coming. So basically, Konami has officially announced a selection box is coming very shortly, and it will contain the Rock himself, Nibiru. So what this card does is a very famous card. It's essentially known as the combo killer, especially in the TCG where they don't have access to Max C, meaning the only real way to deal with combo decks is to play Nibiru. Now what Nibiru does, it's a pretty simple card. Basically, once your opponent has summoned 5 times, you can activate this thing from your hand to tribute every single monster on the field and summon itself to the board. Only it then gives your opponent a token that has attack equal to the amount of all those monsters combined. So basically, if your opponent tries to go for a big ass combo, you summon Nibiru and stop the combo in their tracks. That's the whole point of this card. Very, very well known card and had a huge impact on the TCG. Not as much as in the OCG, although it is used, it's just Max C exists over there, so there's not as much of a need for this card, but essentially, this could be the combo killer for Duel Links. So the question becomes pretty simple. How many times are we realistically summoning 5 times in a turn in Duel Links? It's also important to note that because we're playing Duel Links, we're playing with skills, and skills like to summon cards to the field. Those skills won't count towards the 5 summons for Nibiru unless Konami does some weird coding because for some reason they want this to be like a hard counter to skills as well. Unless something weird happens, Nibiru isn't going to count your summons from skills, so keep that in mind. Also keep in mind, a lot of these decks, although they might summon more than 5 times, a lot of the time, especially if they know Nibiru is popular or they know their opponent's playing Nibiru, they can summon slightly less, still end on fairly significant end fields, and just completely make Nibiru a dead card in your hand. So we'll talk about how many of these decks can also do that as well. Alright, so we're just going to have a look at some of the top tier decks right now. Obviously the meta can change and things might happen, all that kind of stuff, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But right now, when Nibiru is added, how impactful is it going to be currently? So let's have a look at some of these decks. So first of all, we have Duel Links. Now I've been seeing a lot of doomer posting about this one, a lot of people that think this deck gets hit the absolute hardest by Nibiru being added, and I very much disagree with that. Keep in mind all the rocket summons are during the end phase, and Nibiru is only a main phase effect, so if you save the summoning for the end phase, because they summon off the destroyed effects, it won't really affect the deck at all. Things like Rapid Trigger, if you're setting a Rapid Trigger, then just filling up your board with some rockets, then summon during your opponent's turn, you're not going to care about it at all, literally at all. Obviously this deck has the ability to do 5 summons, it's like a Tracer, popping a quick launch summoning a dude to the field, that's already 3, Link Summon, Ritual Summon. You very much easily can go over 5, especially with things like Galactic Spiral Dragon as well. But in all honesty, those are more like god hands. On average, you might go over 5, but if you don't want to go over 5 and play around Nibiru, maybe Nibiru becomes a popular card, you can very much easily just not go over 5 with this deck, and it will still be a hella top tier meta relevant deck. I don't think this deck cares about Nibiru much at all. Alright, next up we have your Perform Mage. Now this one definitely cares about Nibiru. Keep in mind, you are summoning via the skill with it, and again, the skills don't count towards the Nibiru summon, but if you're ever going to try to go for the 2 Xyz plays on turn 1, which is basically all this deck can do, yeah, this hella gets hurt by Nibiru. You're doing hella special summons from your Hat Trigger, you're getting multiple monsters on the field, you're summoning back from the graveyard, summoning twice with Xyz summons. This deck would be awful into Nibiru, it'd be terrible, so here's one that's definitely affected by it. Alright, next up we have Unchained, which is arguably the strongest, or at least the most popular deck currently. This doesn't care about Nibiru at all. You can probably go over 5 summons if you have a really strong hand, but on average, just sort of going into your Link summon turn 1, setting your trap card, and then just sort of passing. It's not that kind of deck where you just slam the field with tons and tons of monsters, and even if you did, you might even have an Abomination or a Abominable Chamber set that can revive back during your opponent's turn, with things like Escape to pop cards or other back row or whatever. It's just not that kind of deck that cares that much about Nibiru existing, so because this is the most popular deck, I think Nibiru in the current meta will just have no chance, just based on this one alone. Alright, next up we have your, well, I don't even need to click on this one. Blue Eyes, unless you have an absolutely absurd hand or something, you're not doing 5 summons. I don't even know what hand that would have to be, but you're not doing 5 summons with this deck. Fleur, this one is the actual deck that gets hit the hardest. This deck gets completely shit on by Nibiru. It's not even close. To be fair though, this deck already gets shit on by like every single hand trap in the game currently anyway, so adding Nibiru to it just is like, just another one to add to the mix of things that can shit on this deck. There are ways you can sort of set up whatever the negate synchro monster is, I've forgotten its name, the big negate monster, but if you're doing that, you're going to have a worse end field anyway, so I'm trying to see if I can find it here, but yeah, it's just like, this deck, it just gets hella hurt by Nibiru. It's terrible into it, so there's not much defense for it. It's just, yeah. Fleur gets shit on. But considering that's like a tier 3 deck anyway, same with Infernoble Knight, which is mostly Fleur as well, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's mostly Fleur as well. Both these decks, hella get shit on. They need to do more than 5 summons. They can sometimes summon a synchro beforehand, or try to get to a synchro that can negate, but that would take like most of their resources, and at that point their field's kind of shit, so Fleur, terrible into it. Sacred Beast, very similar to Blue Eyes. This does potentially summon 5 times if you're lucky, because a lot of the time you can actually get out the Jin Buster and go for a Link Karibo on your first turn, but those are the actual like god hands, and most of the time on average it's not doing that. Sometimes it's more like a 4/3 summon deck, where if you're ending on Link Karibo, that is. Some people just save this card anyway and they're just not going to summon 5 times whatsoever, so yeah. It's not a good card to use into our Sacred Beast. And Shadow, once again, just like some of the other decks in here, it has the potential to go over 5, but it's not really that great into this deck at all, especially considering I'm pretty sure Nibiru only tributes face up. Yeah, tribute as many face up, and Shadow's a lot of the time just summoning face down, so if you do get the Nibiru off, well, they're probably still going to have the trap card set to summon out the window during your turn, and a bunch of face downs that don't get hit by the Nibiru, so terrible into Shadow, actually. It gets rid of like 1 card at most, so yeah, if we look at the current meta, Nibiru is looking pretty shit. There's like, there's 1 deck in here, the Fleur stuff, there's Performage, there's like 3 here, and a little bit Borrow Link, but otherwise it is terrible into the rest, so you wouldn't play Nibiru in this format. At least I don't think so. So we've established that it's probably not going to be very good in the current format, but does that mean it's just a bad card that will never be good? Not at all. I think the card should be treated pretty similar to Artifact's Lancia, where, depending on the metagame, it might just be an absurd card. If you think back to the last meta, where it was just all Borrow Link in combination with Agent, that would be an insane meta for Nibiru, and it was an insane meta for Lancia. But if you think back further than that, Lancia just didn't really have that many formats where it was ever good, and in the current one, Lancia just doesn't really exist anymore outside of sometimes in Borrow Link. So it's going to be sort of like that, I think, when Nibiru sometimes is just absurd. It just shits on Agent, and shits on Zombies, and shits on Mayakashi, and just shits on all these decks. On Avalon it would suck into, or would be really good into as well. All these decks get like hella hurt by it, but it takes that kind of a format. Otherwise, in some other formats, it just doesn't really have that much of a... It doesn't really do a whole lot. Things like your Sky Striker wouldn't care. Things like, I guess it would hurt TG. It might hurt Galaxy Photon. There's actually quite a lot of decks in here it would hurt, but it hurts Live Twin quite a bit. I think they do 5 summons. But yeah, you sort of get the picture. Some metas, it's absolutely insane. And other metas, it's a pretty dead card, honestly. So that's sort of where I'm sitting on it right now. So in conclusion, do I think you should spend all of your hard-earned gems and all of your cash on this selection box to obtain Nibiru? Well, unless you have some interest in the other spell cards in here, such as maybe you're a Live Twin player and you want to play with their new spell card, or maybe you're interested in Pot of Avarice for some silly decks like testing this out in Mayakashi or something. Unless you have interest in the other cards in here, and keep in mind, there's still a couple more new cards to be leaked yet that might take your fancy or might just be super insane and just make the value of this box drastically skyrocket where it just makes it hella worth to get. Unless there's other cards in here that are hella worthwhile, I wouldn't be going into it for Nibiru. Nibiru, by no doubt, will actually be meta relevant in a format. There'll be a format where Nibiru becomes like the most insane card in it, similar to how Lancia was in that previous Agent format. There'll be a format where Nibiru is just absurd. But is it ever going to be a card which you absolutely have to play, or you're just going to lose every game? No, you don't need Nibiru. And a lot of formats, it's not going to be worth running anyway. So if this was a standard box, would I say it's worth going into for Nibiru? Probably. But for a selection box where you have to spend actual money, I highly recommend not doing it. I don't really think it's worth it at all, especially considering we don't really want to support selection box purchases unless, because they're shitty paywalled products that shouldn't be in the game anymore. But so if you don't have to support them, it's probably best you don't. So unless there's some absurd card added to this pack that is just hella worth going into, or you're interested in Live Twin or interested in Pot of Avarice, I wouldn't be digging for the Nibiru. I don't think it's worth it. And yeah, it's a good card, just not going to be worth the money. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. I know it was kind of a quick one, but obviously, yeah, I just wanted to make a quick video talking about Nibiru, considering there's a lot of discussion about it, and I wanted to give just my thoughts. So, hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to leave a like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, I have a ton of content based around the latest boxes when they release in a couple of days, so look forward to that. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you see you next one. Laters.
Hey, big brother, can I watch SpongeBob? Shut up, Mokuba. I'm busy flagging YouTube videos to compensate for the fact that I have an extremely small penis. Oh.